This episode of the Lunch with Chris show is brought to you by my upcoming book, 30 Days to Limitless. You can find out more about it at limitless30.com.
This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Welcome to the Lunch with Chris show, where your host, Chris Daly, talks with movers and shakers from all walks of life to get their opinions on important questions. Each season, there is a new question and new guests. This short, impactful show skips all the fluff and just brings you insightful answers from great guests. And now, doing his part to change the world in a positive way, your host, Chris Daly.
When a small-town boy heads to the big city to join one of the largest police forces in the country, he has a lot of stories to tell. That is The Long Road Home. The author, as you'll learn about, is Sandy Wall, whose real-life exploits far exceed his novel. All right, everybody, join me in welcoming Sandy Wall to the show. Sandy, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, you bet. So, I guess before we get into the whole SWAT and the training and the cool stories, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Bloomington, Texas, and born and raised. Well, I was born in a hospital in Port Lavaca, but raised my entire life there until I went off to Houston to join the police department and start my career there.
So you went day one. It was law enforcement.
No, I actually was kind of didn't. I wanted to be in like broadcasting or something like that. And I was always hunting, fishing, and that kind of thing. So I was torn between either being a game warden or trying to get into radio or TV. And then I started my college career at University of Houston Victoria Center, and took some speech courses and drama and that sort of thing. And I could see the competition was way above my grade. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be that successful here. So then I looked at being a game warden and thought, man, that'd be cool if I could hunt and fish and be out in the outdoors every day. And at the time, they were not paying very well.
Right.
And so then I thought, well, law enforcement maybe. And I happened to have a buddy that was going to U of H in the Victoria campus. And I went to see him, spend a weekend, and we kind of cruised around around Houston. And boy, I loved that. That was big, little kid in a big city.
Yep. And
I saw a billboard said, join the Houston Police Department. And for whatever reason, I just took that number down. Called them, never thinking that I'd ever make it through whatever the process was. And it took a while. It was about 3 or 4 months of background checks and jumping through hoops and going back to Houston and taking lie detectors and PT tests and all that kind of stuff. And then before long, they sent an investigator to Bloomington, and he's going around talking to all my buddies and, checking with my school and all that. And next thing you know, I got a call and says, you're in this academy class, be here on this date. And I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten into?
Nice. So you're obviously in great shape. What was that? I guess your standard back then. So was PT not an issue, or was that struggle?
Yeah, no, PT was I actually overtrained for it. Now, I was never a really big athlete. I had 3 older brothers. 2 of them were really good athletes, went on to play college level. But like I said, I was always into hunting and fishing. I played enough to make the team. And sat the bench a lot, get in the game here and there, but never was a standout of any. But then when I got into college, I had an older brother that was really into weightlifting and powerlifting. And he got me a job at a gym there in Victoria to kind of supplement my money while I was going to college. And that's where I really got into working out and staying in shape. And then when I took this opportunity to go to the police department, I started overtraining. I thought it was going to be like military boot camp.
Right.
And man, I was doing 2-a-days and running and plyometrics and weightlifting and everything. And then when I got there, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't anything like military boot camp. It was more of a real tough PT course, know, and it was about that level. And I flew through it relatively easy.
Yeah, it's interesting that We both grew up outside of Victoria in different towns. Both went to UH Victoria. We both had jobs in gyms while we're going there.
Is that right?
Yeah, but obviously our paths diverged quite a bit.
Right.
So when was this? When you and then you got the job? Did you immediately move up there?
Oh yeah, I when I got the job, of course, I didn't move up until I started day one. I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Cypress, northwest part of Houston, and I went up and stayed with them 2 or 3 days prior to the first day of the academy. And I write about this in my book. It's kind of really what sets the tone for the theme of the book is all the things that went tragically wrong for me. I was so out of my element, never being in a big city. And but I got an apartment. I had no furniture. All I could afford was just a mattress. I didn't even have a frame and box springs. I just put a mattress on the floor. I laid my clothes out on the carpet next to my bed or my mattress. And in my living room, I had a beanbag and a cardboard box that I put a little TV on. And that's it. That's all I had. And then some things to eat off, utensils and things and that wasn't even until later. Right at first, I was just eating out every day. Right. And anyway, so it was very meager beginnings, but I struggled through it. And, every time they paid you while you were in the academy. It wasn't great, but I didn't have a lot of expenses. My only real expense was eating, fuel and for my car and then the rent. And so, I started collecting. And before long, I got a little this and a little that. And by the end of the academy, I was had a few pieces of furniture. It wasn't quite as bad as it was when I started.
Nice. Well, I want to go into great detail about the book, but you mentioned it, so let's go ahead and mention it so people know what it is we're talking about. What is your book?
The book is The Long Road Home, and it's featured on Amazon. You can get it in both, the hardback, paperback, and the digital version. And it is based on my career. Now, it's a novel, so there's some liberties taken with the stories. Not all of them happen exactly like that, and but they were close. And but every story in there actually happened. Yeah. It just didn't quite. Some of them happened exactly like that. Some of them happened a little bit differently to fit the theme and everything.
The names have changed to protect the innocent.
All the names have been changed, but they're very, very similar. In fact, kind of a funny story. One of the guys that I met in the academy and became fast friends with, and we later on became roommates and we remained best friends all the way up until he just recently committed suicide, and which was really tragic. But his name was Jack Frost. And so I had to put him in the book, as if anybody reads the book, you'll find out why. There's so many funny stories in there about Jack, just the stupid things he would do. Not intentionally, not intending to be funny, just he was that way. Things just always went wrong for him. And then he ended up getting shot in the line of duty, almost died, had to be life flighted. And anyway, so there was a lot of stories about him. So when the book's about to be published, my wife said, you've got to tell Jack he's in this book. And I said, yeah, you're right. So as luck would have it, he happened to be coming to Victoria. He'd retired and moved to LaGrange. And he happened to be coming to Victoria. And I said, hey, come by the house. I want to talk to you. And he's like, okay. So he comes by, and I could tell he could tell something was up. And we sat right here on my back porch. And my wife, Teresa, sat on one side. I sat on the other. And I said, hey, I wrote a book, and I just want to warn you, you were in it. And he looked at me real puzzled, like, what kind of book? And I said, well, it's a novel, but it's based on my career, and obviously you're in a lot of it. And he said, I am. And I said, just the stories, just things, funny things and tragic things that we were involved in. And he said, well, you didn't tell all those stories, did you? And I said, yeah, pretty much. And he said, well, you didn't tell about the girl in the yellow Corvette, did you? And I went, yeah. And he goes, oh, he drops his head down. And I said, well, it's okay, Jack. And he said, well, you didn't tell the story about the prostitute in the elevator, did you? And I said, yeah. And he drops his head. He goes, oh. And so he goes through about 3 or 4 of these questions. And as he realizes I'm telling, it's a tell-all book. Yeah. And my wife then, she feeling sorry for him. She said, Jack, don't worry. He's changed your name. No one's going to know. And so he looks at me and said, well, what's my name? And I said, John Frost. And he drops his head. He goes, oh. But anyway, but yeah, all the crazy characters you can imagine, crime fighting in a big city, and I had a very diverse career. Obviously, in Academy, there's a few stories. In Patrol, there's quite a few stories. I had to do a 6-month stint in a jail, which it was kind of like getting drafted to the military. If your number come up, you had to go.
Right.
So for 6 months, I had to work the jail. There's a lot of stories in there, and then I worked narcotics for 3 years, and there's a lot of stories in there, and then. The major part of my career was 22 years on the SWAT team.
Right.
And the book tells all about how I made the team and all the training that I went through to get there. And then as I start to build my knowledge base and become a more viable member of the SWAT team, and then eventually my goal was to make team leader, and I did. Mm-hmm. So the last 12 years I was team leader over there, and it's the best time of my life. And looking back on it, it's just wonder I didn't get shot. I never did. I had some buddies get shot, but I just got real lucky. And I say that several times in the book. The old adage, I'd rather be lucky than good.
Right.
And that was me.
Nice. And so back at the Academy, tell me what that was like, and maybe if you can hint at one of the stories that.
Once, as I mentioned, the very first day, being a little, small town kid, I drove the route the night before. Yep. Thinking, okay, it was like 22 minutes to downtown to the police academy. I went right there, found out where I was going to park, everything. Well, I get up next morning, Monday morning, and pull out, and I realize, oh my God, yep. I see the traffic, and I'm going to be late, and I was, and that was like almost a fatal area. They literally, that's borderline kicking you out first day if you're late. But I survived it, and several other things went wrong, and I meet the villain of the book that day, and. He turns out to be my nemesis the entire book. He keeps popping back up in my career. And, as he develops his career and I develop my career, and then at the end there's a big gotcha, as a kind of a crescendo of our two careers colliding and personalities and what have you. But, I meet this I meet Jack Frost, which is he played college football in Louisiana, and a big, strong, athletic-looking dude. And I was thinking, I want to partner with this guy. Yeah. I want to be with the cool dudes, and the big, jocks. And then this little. Just a wimpy-looking dude who's like me. He's struggling, trying to fit in, and he's wanting to partner with me. And I don't want to shun him. I don't want to be mean to him or abusive, but I'm kind of trying to stay away from him, trying to avoid him as much as I can. And it just seems like he and I are on a collision course to always get in trouble together. But when I walked in that first day, and the nemesis of the book, his name is Hurley, he and I lock eyes, and he dresses me down, not only right in front of the class, but then later as we went up to the office, and he puts me on what they call the coffee squad, mm-hmm. which means you had to be there an hour early the next morning, and that way until they say you're no longer on the coffee squad, and you're making coffee for all the instructors and that kind of thing. And I think I got, and there was an Olympic squad, there was a notebook squad, there was every kind of squad you can imagine. The Olympic squad was if you weren't doing well in PT, mm-hmm. and you stayed in at lunch and PT'd more. And anyway, I think I got on every squad there was, except for the Olympic squad. I shined in that, and it was a struggle, but we kind of a funny story in the book. We get selected to take part in a monster truck show at the Astrodome. Yeah. And they wanted the fire department academy against the police department academy, and they picked 12 each of us, and we were going to be the halftime entertainment, and they had a city council person out there to be the referee. And so we had on all blue T-shirts, and the fire department had all on red T-shirts. And so you can imagine the crowd that comes to a monster drag race kind of thing. And so a bunch of rednecks and beer drinking and, guys. And so they love firemen, but they do not like cops. And when the fire department ran out first, and the whole crowd, I was cheering for him. And we're thinking, hey, this is going to be cool. Right. Until they announced, here comes the cops. man, they started screaming and booing and throwing things at us, literally from the stands, empty beer cups and things like that. And we're trying to just dodge and weave and make it out there. And then when the tug of war actually happened, we won. Nice. And the crowd really didn't like that. And then when it was time to run back into underneath the stands, back into where we came out of, they are really chunking stuff at it now. I mean, they're chunking food, pickles, everything. And we're dodging and weaving. And we get back under the stands, and the fire department comes running in behind us. And they look at us and said, man, what did y'all do to piss them guys off? And I said, hey, everybody loves a fireman. Exactly. And so we had a lot of little funny things like that happen. But it was a good time. I learned a lot.
Yeah, no doubt. And then, so was it like you see on TV, because you see all these different cop TV shows where they have police academy and, pretty much what they show on TV, or was it?
Yeah, it was militaristic in the way of, dress uniforms and inspections and marching and all that kind of stuff. And it was very rigid in terms of academically. Right. Like I said, the PT was the only thing that I was, like I said, a little overqualified for, or overtrained for. We go on about a 2-3 mile run. We do push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and we got into boxing. And I'd already done some boxing before I left and went there, so I was a little above the grade there. And then we actually had to do 3-round matches with each other, so the academic part was I would say college level. Having just come from 2 years of college, it was
so what was probably the biggest surprise for you?
Probably the biggest surprise was that it wasn't tougher physically, because like I said, I was expecting a PT, and then the other part of it was what all went into responding to a call, and they're trying to teach you about crime scenes and how you can contaminate it so easily, and then laws of search and seizure and laws of arrest. And so every class they would bring in a subject matter expert. So laws of search and seizure, they would bring in a district attorney, assistant district attorney, and he would teach a class, or she would teach a class. And then, when it was crime scenes, they would bring in a CSU person. Yeah. And then when it was investigation, they'd bring in a homicide detective. And, all those, and then some of them was just, would they traffic? They'd bring in a traffic cop. They were bringing in people. That's what they did every day. So that was unbelievably interesting. I never realized all that went into, in the TV shows. I mean, they'll get in a shooting, and then they're like, put their guns up, and like, okay, I'll see you back at the office. Well, that's the last thing is going to happen. Yeah. You're not going to be going home for a long while. You got to go answer to a lot. Yeah. And not to mention, all the other internal affairs stuff and things. So yeah, it's nothing like the TV.
And then once you leave the academy, how do they assign where you are and what you do?
Well, some of it comes on just demand. Like they really need a certain amount of officers in this particular part of the city for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. They tried to match you up with the area of town you live with, so you didn't have as much of a commute. And I was living in the northwest part of town, so they put me in the northwest part of town. I actually wanted to be in a higher crime area, like something like North Shepherd or Central Police area, but I got Northwest. So they called Northwest the Ponderosa because it was a newer part of town.
That's where I lived.
Okay, yeah. It was a newer part of town, and upper middle class to middle class. They had slum areas, and they had a lot of crime out there. In fact, I always said you could get all the crime fighting you want if you weren't looking for it. Right. But it wouldn't fall in your lap. You get a lot of the officers that are working the what we call the ward areas, which is more the slums, the ghettos, whatever. Crime falls in your lap. You're driving down the road and you look over and you see a guy running out of a 7-Eleven with a gun in his hand. It's just there.
It's everywhere.
And you don't have to go look for it to find it. But in the Ponderosa, you did have to look for it. But I got into foot chases, car chases. Was involved in a couple of shootings, I got all I wanted. But like I said, you had to look for it.
So, and this is just jumping ahead. So, in retrospect, does this job affect your view on humanity? I grew up and I still believe people are good. Yeah. Is that different?
No, yeah, it did. You're dealing with the scum of the earth.
Yeah.
So you tend to get a little negative, and then you tend to be a little paranoid that you're thinking crime is everywhere. So anytime I get out of my car, like my parking lot, I'm looking around and walking into I wouldn't walk into a 7-Eleven, even off duty, just to go buy a Coke until I look through the windows to see who's all in there, because you just never know. But it makes you more tainted. And I'll never forget, I had one of our instructors in the academy, he warned us. He said, guys, when you get out there on the street, don't let all your friends be cops. Because if that's all you associate with, that's all you know, then it becomes us against them. Yeah. And that's not the way of seeing. He was trying to, instill in us that the vast majority of the people of the city of Houston like cops. Mm-hmm. They want to be around cops. But they're a little intimidated by you. They just don't know you. And the people we deal with are the scum of the earth, which is probably the 5 or 10 percenters. Mm-hmm. But if you will get to know people that aren't cops, socialize with them, and you will find that to be true. And I agree. And luckily, when I married my wife, we started socializing with a lot of her teacher friends. Oh, good. And that's where I kind of got the idea about writing the book, because the first thing they want to hear about is, hey, tell us a good cop story.
Right.
So we'd be at a party or something, and I'd be telling story after story after story, and the next thing you know, they're saying, man, you ought to write a book. Yeah. And it's not just me. Every police officer out there has these stories in them. The old saying is, it's a front row seat to the greatest show on earth. And if you ever watch, Cops on TV, the TV program, in a big city, it's like that. That's what you're doing.
And it's a fascinating piece of the world that we can see through things like your books. You look at TV, half the TV shows are cop shows.
Yeah.
We're interested in that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's exciting. Absolutely. Now, it can be dull and boring. And then, one of the things we always talked about is, you're riding an 8-hour shift, and about 7 hours is sheer boredom unless you're really out there looking. But if you're just riding around answering calls, and then it's fairly boring. But then there'll be 1 hour of sheer terror while you're jumping out of a car chasing somebody, or you get in a car chase, or something happens in front of you and you have to pull somebody out of a burning car or whatever. And it's and that's actually hard on you physically. A lot of the doctors would come talk to us, and they said that adrenaline dump that you get whenever you're involved in something like that is hard on your body.
Yeah.
And all the other hormones and coagulants that dump in your bloodstream. So they were trying to encourage us to stay in shape and exercise, eat right, and all that to counteract some of that. Of course, cops are notorious for not doing that,
right,
and getting overweight. We see each other in the academy, and then I'd see a couple of my. And I weighed the same thing today that I weighed. Yeah. I weighed the day I graduated from the academy, but I'd see guys that I graduated from academy, and within 2 years they'd gained 30 or 40 pounds, and I'm like, oh my God, that's not good.
No, it's a roller coaster down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're in the Ponderosa. Did you ever? Or how long until you got moved out of there?
I did my 3 years patrol, and then I decided I wanted. A buddy of mine had made the SWAT team, mm-hmm. and of course, I was really into working out then. I was going to the gym almost every day, and I became roommates with Jack Frost, and he was an athlete in high school and college, and so he was going to the gym with me every day, and then I saw that SWAT team stuff, and I thought, man, that would be cool. But I thought, nah, I could never make that. I thought those guys were gods. And then a guy in my academy class made it, and I was in better shape than he was, or more athletic than he was. And I thought, well, if he could make it, and I heard there was another opening, so I tried out. So I did 3 years on patrol, 3 years in narcotics, and then 22 years on the SWAT team.
Nice.
Yeah.
And before we delve into SWAT, while you're on patrol, narcotics, what was the first time that you, I guess, feared for your life on the job?
Most of the time it happened so fast. By the time it was over, you didn't have time to get really scared,
right?
Because you got scared afterwards, but it was all over with, and then your hands were trembling a little bit, and you realize your heart has been racing. I'm trying to. God, I know I got scared a few times in patrol. chasing a guy down, and I knew he was bigger than me, and he's, especially in the wintertime, he's got a heavy jacket on, he can have a gun or some other knife, and I know at some point I'm going to be on him because I'm closing on him, and it's going to be a fight, just he and I, because quite often I'd outrun my partner, or my partner would just give up and go back and get the car and try to follow us in the car. And it's going to be a fight, and then you hear you remember stories from the academy and stories that happened while I was still in patrol of officers that got in a fight and got their gun taken away, or end up getting stabbed or shot, and okay, this is going to happen. But you're somewhat pissed because this guy is running from you, so you try to let that overtake you. But that's when a lot of officers make mistakes because they're letting their emotions guide their actions versus being smart about it. But probably the scaredest I've ever been in patrolling narcotics was in narcotics. I ended up getting a shooting, and we were warned about it. And looking back on it, was so stupid. We should have avoided the whole thing. But we were going up a dark stairway to a second-story apartment, and we were trying to be really, really quiet and we could hear music coming from that apartment, and we wanted to have the element of surprise. So we didn't want them to know we were there until we were breaching the door. And right as we get to the top of the stairs, and I described this in the book, just turns out he was just a user. He went in and scored, and he was coming out, leaving the place, and he sees us. So we would say we're compromised. He sees us. He starts screaming, hey, what's going on? Well, we're thinking, okay, the guy that was supposed to be the breacher was ahead of me. I'm first in the door. Yeah. He drops the ram and grabs this guy to get him out of the way. And as he pulls him out of the way, he can see into the room, and he sees a guy with a shotgun. Oh. Well, he yells, shotgun. And I'm thinking, okay, in that second, I'm thinking, okay, do we back out of here? Right. Or do we keep going? And there's some dynamics going on that I write about in the book that I had already almost been in a couple of shootings, and the guys were starting to question whether or not I would even pull the trigger. Right. There's one gal, she had the gun pointed at me, and I talked her into putting the gun down. I just didn't want to kill her, and the way she was holding the gun, I could tell she didn't know what she was doing. Right. Turned out it was a revolver and didn't even have a round in the. No, I take it was a semi-automatic, but didn't have a round chambered. Yeah. And so she couldn't have shot me, but I didn't know that at the time. Sure. Anyway, so there's some rumblings in my team. It's like, hey, so you think Sandy can pull the trigger? So anyway, now I'm faced with this situation. Do I go in that door? And if I back down, okay, this Sandy being scared again. Yeah. So I went. And I remember right then thinking, uh-oh, this is it. This may not end up good. It turned out okay for me, but in retrospect, we should have all backed down out of the stairs. We shouldn't have wanted to force that confrontation, but it did.
So you talk about when the adrenaline hits and you're running on emotion. That's kind of the knock against police, is that, the whole defund the police nonsense and all that. And I think it's nonsense. So you've got a lot of people thinking these are hyped up, angry people, with guns. So take that from your position and explain, that sure there probably are some bad apples out there, but educate some people on what's really happening out there.
Oh, absolutely. There are good and bad in every profession. I don't care if it's a doctor, a lawyer, a cop, whatever. And there are some bad cops. There's some cops I have actually arrested, and because they needed to go to jail, and they don't need it because they make the rest of us look bad, right? And I would be so upset when I would read the news or see it on TV about a bad cop that got arrested because it just made us all look terrible. I correlate it back to a movie. Let's say it's a John Wayne movie, and he's been chasing this piece of for whatever, and we're all involved in this plot, and we're emotionally, and we've lived it with John Wayne as he catches this guy, and then there's a fight right at the end, and at the last second, the guy gives up and says, okay, I surrender. And John said, not so fast. And he rears back and punches the guy one last time. And everybody in the audience is going, yeah, he deserved that. But when you're sitting in your living room watching it on TV, and that cop is experiencing those exact same emotions, and he gets that one last lick or two in, those are and everybody's appalled by it because you're not emotionally involved.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that cost cops careers. And I've been there. I write about it in the book. I did a couple things that I shouldn't have done, but I let my emotions get away from me. Thank goodness I always say I did 28 years on the police department, and the only reason I didn't get fired or indicted is because I didn't get caught. And when I did get caught, I was able to blame it on somebody else. But that's a joke,
right?
But no, I did things. I'll admit it that I would not have survived scrutiny today. But policing in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s were different, and the standards that we were held to were a little bit different. Not saying it was right, but it was the methods by which we were all judged by, and it's always wherever the bar is at. That's where you meet. And if the bar is picked up a little bit higher, then that's what you're going to meet the next time. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that explanation relating it to entertainment because, like you said, you watch Dirty Harry, you're cheering.
Yeah, right.
Dirty Harry would have a career.
He would never make it. No, you're right.
That's crazy. So you talk about the transition into SWAT, and again, these were the top of the heap. They were who you aspired to be. Mm-hmm. Was it everything you thought it was going to be?
Yes, it was. It was everything. In fact, the first true training over there is what they call basic school. And every SWAT cop in Texas, and I would imagine across the country, goes through that when they join the SWAT team. And until then, you may be over on a SWAT team a few weeks, maybe in a few months, until you go through your basic school. But you're kind of like a junior guy and not really allowed to do much because you're not certified in all these different skills. But basic week was that hell week that I thought it was going to be. And oh my God, they put us through hell. I won't say it was Navy SEAL hell week, but it was tough. Yeah. And I was in real good shape, and they pushed us. But during the day, early in the morning and late in the evening, we were PTing. But during the day, they had us in classroom where we were learning about things like a perimeter on an objective, and we were learning about things like all the different equipment that we used, that they used, ballistic shields, and all the different firearms and how to clean them and maintenance them and use them. And I'd never shot a machine gun before. First time I shot an M4, I was just amazed by it, so it was just drinking through a fire hose. It was coming at you full blast. So once I graduated basic school that week, I had just enough knowledge to be dangerous, So I was allowed to respond to a SWAT situation then and actually take an active role. They would assign me a perimeter position, or you're going to be on this entry team or whatever. But you're still being held back or placed with somebody else until you start to get your feet under you. And I would have never thought it was that much to responding to a special threat situation until I had been through a basic school and learned all the different aspects and elements.
Nice. And so what determines, hey, SWAT needs to come in?
Okay. Well, it's kind of like we call it a special threat situation.
Right.
Narcotics will call SWAT a lot if it's maybe a warrant that they want to execute, and either the suspects are heavily armed, heavily fortified, or have a history of violence against police. And so those three things is usually the criteria that they'll say, hey, we ought to turn this over to the SWAT team and let them run it. And it's just that I always say if you're trained to do one thing and that's all you do, and you have better equipment and more time to train, you're just going to be better at it.
Right.
And so it's not that a narcotics unit can't run their own warrants. It's just that SWAT can do it a little bit safer for the officers and a little bit more efficiently because that's all they do. If it's a special threat situation on patrol, typically a barricades. Anytime someone's either barricaded in a structure, whether it's a building, a house, sometimes even just a car or a bus or anything, they're inside some stronghold objective and they're refusing to come out. Now, barricade doesn't necessarily mean the traditional barricade with furniture and all that. It may be just nothing more than a closed door or a closed door that the lock has been turned. But for whatever reason, patrol there's no need to go up and force that confrontation because lives aren't being taken right now. And maybe there are people in there that are potentially hostages, but he's not shooting them right now. That would be an active shooter, and their patrol's not waiting on SWAT. They're going to go right now and do what they can do to stop the killing. But those are the two things. Whether it's we'd get called in like homicide, they'd arrest, or they'd have an arrest warrant for a guy that was, I remember we had a guy that was a hitman he was good for several murders, and they knew the apartment he was staying in. So they called SWAT, and we got there. It was kind of a funny story. After we got all surrounded, we're ready to go, and said, okay, make the call. They rang him on the phone, and they tell him, this is the Houston Police Department. We have you surrounded. You need to come out. And he's like, who is this? And he didn't believe him. He said, well, this is the Houston Police Department. We have you surrounded. The SWAT team is out here. And he's like, he hung up on him. They called him again. And he said, who is this? And he said, come to the window. So he comes to the window, and we hit him with about 4 or 5 lasers off of our guns. And he gets back on the phone, I'm coming out. And he came out and surrendered. But we always say, if you can make them come to your ambush rather than go to theirs, that's much better. And, if they don't want to come out, then we've got the tear gas option. And that was a big learning tool about tear gas. And obviously they put you in the gas because if you're around it enough, you're going to get exposed to it. So you might as well learn about it in training, what the effects are and how to deal with it, as opposed to learning for the first time when you're in a traumatic situation.
Yeah, and then lose control.
Right.
What's happening. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's true. So how frequent does SWAT get involved?
Well, it's going to change a lot from city to city, but in a big city like Houston, we only have one SWAT team.
Right.
And they're relatively small. They're still around 24 members, actual entry and sniper guys. And then they have a command element above that, which is about 4 or 5, like 3 sergeants, a lieutenant, and a captain, kind of the hierarchy. And then they'll have a perimeter team now. Back in my day, we didn't even have that, which are part-time guys.
Right.
They come from patrol. They train with SWAT. They go through the same standards. But when they're not training, they're back on patrol, whereas the full-time guys are training all the way. You get a smaller town like Victoria, they don't have that luxury.
Right.
And they probably don't get enough call-ups to justify that. I don't know what Victoria PD does, but I would imagine they'd have 5, 10, 15, 20 call-ups a year, maybe, maybe more. And I don't know. But in Houston, we would get anywhere between 50 and 60 SWAT situations a year, and then another 50 or 60 situations where we were called out to run a warrant or make an arrest, or maybe the president's coming in town and Secret Service wants to augment their protective detail with us, and we'd be in close quarter with the dignitaries, whoever they were. Or sometimes it would be something that was required expertise. I remember us going out and taking down a ship that was supposed to have dope on it. There was another ship that was supposed to have a cargo of oil that had been hijacked at another country and was bringing it into the United States to sell. And supposedly the cartel were involved in this, and they had machine guns and all this, so they wanted us to go onto that boat and take it down. And so we got a lot of weird-looking things. Whenever we'd have an escaped convict, there's parts of the city of Houston or hundreds and hundreds of acres of woods, like Memorial Park, and they sometimes get an escaped convict. Well, they would have a SWAT team. We'd go train that for that, and we go through a certain amount of training, what we call woodland terrain and tracking, and sometimes using dogs. And then, of course, you got a subway system down there underneath the it's electric subway above ground, and then you get the tunnel system downtown. So we had to train in all those environments, and you got 2 major airports, so we had to be prepared to assault aircrafts if it came to that. And plus we had a port, and the list just goes on and on and on. Plus high rises. There's a lot of high rises around, so we'd have to go learn the ins and outs of those high rise buildings and how to move from one floor to another, like through elevator shafts and things like that. There's just so many different environments in a big city that you have to be prepared to operate in, that if this is your first time in that environment, and that yet you're maybe having to try to save a life or save your own, that's a bad situation to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess talk about, you said you graduated up to one of the top positions in
Team leader.
Team leader, yeah. Talk about having the big chair and what that meant.
Well, and I never took a promotional exam. I had the opportunity, could have. A lot of my friends did. But in Houston, if I took a promotional exam to make sergeant, then I leave. I'm gone. And I go wherever the city needs a sergeant. And I had a great job. I had Monday through Fridays, day shift. I had a take-home car. And then I was doing a job that I loved. Yeah. And I had weekends off. I had holidays off and all that. Now, I was off, but I was always on call. Yeah. So I couldn't really go anywhere. But you were off for all practical purposes. If I took a promotional exam, I'd get a little pay raise. But I would go to Northeast nights with Tuesday and Wednesdays off. And work a night shift and in a new environment and lose my city car. Wouldn't have a city car anymore. There really was not a benefit for me. Plus, I just never wanted to leave SWAT. I loved it so much. So the only really advancement for me in terms of career-wise within the SWAT team was to be a team leader. And there's only 4 of them over there. And so I had a group of guys under me that I was responsible for training. And whenever we went out on a situation, we'd be given an assignment, like we might be the entry in a hostage situation. So I'd get my guys ready with the equipment, the plan. We'd all come up with it. And, if you're a good team leader, you're taking input from your guys because they're sharp too. They wouldn't be there if they weren't. And you're given assignments. Okay, Mikey, I need you to be the breacher. Ronnie, I need you on the flashbang and then doing this. And, we're giving out all assignments. And then when we're not working, we're training. And it's up to the team leader to know what his guys are not as proficient in, what they need more time on. Obviously we spent a lot of time on the range because we would qualify with handguns, assault rifles, and we would even qualify with sniper rifles. Heaven forbid I ever had to supplement the sniper team. I was proficient with the weapon. Not as good as those guys were, but I could hold my own. But and we even qualified with a shotgun because sometimes we do shotgun breaching, or sometimes a shotgun was just the best weapon up front in the environment we found ourselves in. So that was it. I was responsible for a 4-man element and then whatever the assignments were and keeping those guys ready to go at a moment's notice.
Nice. And then I saw online pictures of you at various conventions and trainings and stuff like that. Talk about that part of your career, teaching. Yeah,
I started to kind of develop a reputation, so to speak, in the Houston area because I was instructing a lot of area SWAT teams because I just didn't think that the Houston Police Department should sit on all this knowledge. We had a tremendous amount of knowledge. Some of it we learned from the military. Some of it we learned from the FBI and going to other classes because we had some budget to do that. And we would see these other small town SWAT teams around Houston, and they were struggling. They didn't have a budget to go to training. They didn't get as much experience as we had. So I love to say, hey, man, we're going to be over in your area. Why don't you guys come over and train with us? Yeah. And so anyway, I was always reaching out, and I wasn't the only one. Some of the other guys were too. And then before long, we started competing in SWAT competitions around the state, and we even went to Florida and competed there. And I was asked to take over or to run for president of the Texas Tactical Police Officer Association, which was a fledgling, struggling association. Didn't have it about 130 people, and they were going nowhere. And sure enough, but I got elected president. And my mission then was to turn that organization around, and it took about 3 or 4 or 5 years, but we got it and in a real good shape with a lot of help from a lot of good people even in other cities. But now I'm getting a reputation statewide, and then pretty soon the National Tactical Officer Conference is reaching out to me and asking me to be instructor for them. And then I'm reaching out, the FBI sent me to some other, I went to Mexico City to train their SWAT team, and so. Once your resume gets out there and you build a reputation, people say, man, that guy knows his stuff. And I always said the only thing that I did was better than a lot of guys on my team is I had the gift for gab. Right. I wasn't scared to stand in front of those people and say, hey, guys, this is it. And I had the confidence to say, this is the best way to do it. Right. Whereas a lot of guys, they knew the same thing I did. They just weren't as comfortable standing in front of people and doing it. So, and before long, I developed a reputation. I became an adjunct instructor for Safari Land, which was a major manufacturer of law enforcement. And they're the ones I eventually retired to. I had 28 years on the police department. I'd been an instructor for them for 12. And they said, man, you're getting older. You thinking about retiring? And I'm like, I'm not that old. And then I went and looked in the mirror and I went, holy crap, I am old. And so they made me one of those offers and said, why don't you just retire and come to work for us full time? And then I realized how little law enforcement paid and how much better the corporate world paid. So I left the Houston Police Department on a Friday and went to work for them on a Monday and worked for them another 15 years teaching primarily. And I was able to teach in Europe and South America, Central America, Mexico, Canada. Nice. I really got to see a lot and meet a lot of interesting people. And I learned every time. I always say every time you go teach a class, you learn. Yeah. You learn from other people. It's nothing else but maybe the wrong way to do it. Don't do it like that. But it's been a blessed career, and I'm so lucky. I just thankful that it turned out the way it did.
Yeah, and so. Tell me about the book. When did it start? Were you taking notes the whole time, or did you start after you retired?
Like I said, I kept getting these stories. These comments. Man, you ought to write a book.
Right.
And about 10 years ago, a professor at Texas State University I was buddies with, he's a retired Detroit police officer. Mm-hmm. He said, man, I want to write a book about training SWAT guys. And you do a lot of that, and I need your expertise. And I said, man, Doc, I called him Doc because he was a professor. I said, Doc, I don't know how to write a book. And he said, I'll do the heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. I just need your input. So we did. We wrote a book. It's called Training the SWAT Trainer. And it's still available online at Thomas Publishing. But when it was all said and done, I'm like, that wasn't that hard. Yeah. I know Tom helped me with all this, and I owe a lot to that to him, but it gave me a lot of confidence. Yeah. And then now here I am about to retire from Safariland, and my wife and I, we came to the conclusion, hey, we're financially in a position where I don't really need to work anymore, other than maybe just what I want to. And I said, I have got to find something to keep me busy. Yeah. I've got a lot of buddies that have turned into alcoholics. 2 have committed suicide, and I just, I got to stay busy. And she said, why don't you write that book that we've always talked about? And I said, I don't know. And she said, look, just start writing stories, and I'll edit them. She was a high school teacher for 23 years. Yeah. She edited a lot of essays and papers and all that. And so I thought, okay. And I'm an early bird. I'd get up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I just do. And I watch the news, and I get online, and I answer emails. And so I thought, I'm gonna list these stories. So first off, I listed all the stories I had from the academy, all the stories I had from patrol, the stories from the jail, stories from narcotics, and then all the stories of my 22 years on the SWAT team. And I knew I had way more stories than I would need. Mm-hmm. So I started picking the best ones out. And then I would sit down and write. And it would take me, the first draft would maybe 2-3 hours of typing, and I'd have a story. And I'd hand it to my wife, and she'd go, oh, my God. She'd get out that ready, and she would rip it up. And she handed it back to me, and I was like a kid that got an F. And I would be dejected and demoralized and pissed. And I'd go back to my office, and I'd sit there and sulk for a little while, and then I'd think, okay, well, maybe I'd take another run at it. So I'd go back and make the edits that she suggested, and I hand it back to her, and she'd rip it up again, but not as bad. Right. And then after about 2 or 3, sometimes 4 times, she said, that's a good story. So, boy, I'd tuck it away in a little folder. So it took me 3 years to write all the stories that I thought I needed, and going through that process. And then once I completed that, now I said, now somehow I have got to link all these stories with a storyline.
A narrative, yeah.
And then that's when I came up with my villain. He's the only fictional character in the book, although he's based off real people.
Right.
But the way his career works out, all those people didn't always come in contact with me. But anyway, so that took about another year. And then I came up with what I called a manuscript. And I had a buddy that was a retired homicide detective out of Houston. His name was Johnny Bonds. And he wrote a book called The Cop Who Wouldn't Quit. It was a famous whodunit. And he solved it. And it was one of those stories. He wouldn't quit. It took him like 3 years. Mm-hmm. But he solved this thing. And so they wrote a book about it. And so I called him up and I said, hey, I wrote a book. And he said, Sandy, I get guys all the time send me books. And I said, well, and he said, I tell you what, send it to me. But I'm going to tell you, I've yet to get one that I was recommended. Yeah, this is a book. Yeah. And so I was kind of demoralized thinking, oh, he's going to rip me up good. Yeah. But I sent it to him. And it took him 2 weeks to read it. And it was the longest 2 weeks of my life.
I bet.
And then he texted me. He said, Sandy, wow. exclamation mark. He said, call me. We have to talk. And so I called him up, and I'm all excited. My wife's sitting right there by the phone. And he said, this is the best book I think I've ever read. And I said, in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I said, you're kidding me. And I thought, now I'm thinking he's blowing me, right? And he said, no, I'm serious, Andy. He said, look, I've got a publisher. Can I give it to him? And I said, yeah. So, and they read it literally in 2 days, and they called me up and said, we want to publish this. Yeah. And I said, you're kidding me. And so, yeah. So they had me, I had to take out some of the stories. I had too many. It was going to be over 400 pages. Said Amazon won't even print that much. Right. So we needed to trim it down. And then they went back and re-edited it again, and then the rest is history.
Nice. And when was that? When did it come out?
It was like February of 2022, but it didn't go to print and actually come out till June of 2022. So this summer has been out 1 year.
Nice.
And it's done real well. I mean, I'm never going to make a mint of money on it, but I knew I would. But it was a lot of fun writing it, reliving those stories. And the best payment I could ever get is those guys that call me up and say, oh my God, Sandy, I saw myself in that book. I remember that story. And then now I'm writing a sequel because I had so many guys say, man, I can't believe you didn't write that story about that time. And I go, oh my God, I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
And so then I go make notes. And
then the other ones you pulled out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now I've already got enough stories to write a second book. But another really good compliment, as I mentioned, Jack Frost, who just recently committed suicide. He was in a shooting where he almost died. And he called me up because I wrote that story. And I wasn't there, but I knew it, lived it through him. And he said, Sandy, it was like you were there. And I was like, really? He said, it's exactly the way it happened. I went, well, that makes me feel great, Jack, because I was concerned that I screwed it up. And he said, no, it was like you were there. That's exactly the way it happened.
Well, that's very cool. I know you and I met at a book signing.
Right.
Which was cool. I guess I wish we would have had more time to talk there, but I'm glad we got to meet and have this conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I love talking about the book, and I love living old stories, and it's that is. And I mentioned, law enforcement is called the front row seat to the greatest show on earth because most of the stories in there are funny, but then there's some tragic ones, and then there's some that are just despicable. And it's a tribute to the women and men out there that are still doing the job. And, because they're operating in an environment that I just don't think I could have done. I would have got frustrated and walked off or got fired or indicted. And it's amazing they are able to still keep a stiff upper lip and do what needs to be done out there to keep us all safe.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I guess other than looking for the book on Amazon, how can people find out more about you?
Well, you can Google me. I believe it or not, I'm a lot of information out there. I'm an inventor. I invented something called the wall banger, and a lot of Victoria PD has a wall banger. The Sheriff's Department has a wall banger. I've sold them from Canada to South Texas, from Maine to South California, from Washington State to Florida.
And what is that?
It started out as a bang pole, which anybody in the tactical world knows what a bang pole is. It's a way of using a pole to insert a flashbang, which will, into a structure through a window or somewhere. It's a safer way to do it than just chunking it in there and hoping that it doesn't land on somebody or on something. Right. And then it started out as that, and then I came up with a way of being able to put tear gas or OC vapor into a structure utilizing the same pole system. And then I finally came up with a blast chamber that you can put a flashbang into and put it on a standard door, and you can breach that door open without having to go up to it and stand there in front of it with a ram and do it manually. So, and plus it's a shock and awe of your door not just being breached but this huge explosion. Yeah. And so I got all that patented and sold a bunch of them over the country. I have a lot of fun going out and blowing things up and teaching cops how to use that. So and then I still do some expert witness stuff, defending cops that are in a situation where, I always say as long as they had the right state of mind, they were trying to do the right thing, but things went tragically wrong for them. I'm there for them. And now if they went in to knowing that they were doing the wrong thing, then shame on them,
Yeah.
But I stay busy, and then getting down on the Gulf Coast and chasing redfish every once in a while. I try to do that as much as I can.
I like it. Well, Sandy Wall, gosh, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me and sharing some of this very cool story.
Well, it's my pleasure. I hope everybody enjoys the book.
Yeah.